Today's topic is backyard birds in the garden, and our presenter is Jen Lair, who will be speaking to us about backyard birds. Your yard contains more than just plants. It can host a whole ecosystem of creatures, including birds. Learn what birds are found in Central Oregon, how to identify and attract them to your yard. Learn how you tend your yard can influence the birds that you see, as well as what you can add to increase bird activity and nesting. Once the birds are in your yard, learn about their fascinating behaviors, which explains why over 1/3 of Americans watch birds. Jen Lair always had a love for nature and biology, which led to her degree in biology and a master's in wildlife biology. In the year 2000, she moved to Bend to open the Wild Birds Unlimited store, finding a way to share her love with birds and nature with people in their own backyard. She has been involved with various bird, nature, gardening, and pollinator groups over the years and has adapted her own gardening style from hit and miss. Thank you, deer, and freezing temperatures. She has adapted her gardening style to native plants that support native birds and pollinators. And at this point, I will turn things over to Jen.
Great. Thanks for that introduction. And thanks everybody for being here. I know it is a gorgeous day outside. So I appreciate the fact that you've closeted yourself inside on a computer. But we'll be talking about the birds and things that you can see outside when you go out yet again. Let me get my screen shared. Perfect. All right, so what we're going to talk about today is kind of how to attract and identify the common birds that you'll see in your backyards throughout Central Oregon. And obviously, we have a ton more birds than I'm covering here. I'm just kind of hitting the highlights of the ones that are the most common and the ones that everybody wants to know. But there's always a lot more out there and always a lot more to learn. So whenever you want to attract any sort of animal or any sort of creature to your yard, there are the 4 elements of habitat that they need to survive. So all animals need some source of food. They need some source of water. They need shelter from the elements, and that could be, where they hang out at night or through the winter. They also need a place to raise their young. So we're going to kind of go through those 4 elements and talk about things that you can add to your yard, as well as things that are already in your yard that you can facilitate. So the first thing we're going to talk about is why feed the birds, because a lot of people are like, well, why should I? Do they need anything? Perfect. So the first thing to keep in mind is when we feed birds in our backyard, we are really just supplementing their natural food sources. The birds that live in our area have lived here long before us. They know where to find mostly insects, seeds, and berries are the main 3 things that most of our songbirds around here are eating. And there's sufficient that for them to be here. So what we're doing when we're feeding the birds is just kind of supplementing that, helping them out, and getting a chance to draw them in closer to us so we can watch and enjoy them. So they've found even when feeders are put out, and they've done a lot of this with like chickadees in the Midwest, they put out unlimited bird feeders, 100% full of seed all the time, tag birds and watch and see. And they find that even when birds have unlimited seed available, they're still only coming to the feeders about 40% for about 40% of their diet. They're still eating lots of insects. They're still foraging for natural seeds and foods. So the good thing is that's why you don't have to worry about vitamin supplements. These are not like pet birds where you 100% control their environment. These are wild birds. They're getting what they need. They're just coming to us for that little extra calories and food to help them out. They've also found that when people are feeding birds, that extra food allows them to increase survival rates, especially during harsh winter and other weather events, and when they're really stressful. So that's both winter, when there tends to be less food around, and also in spring, because that's when they're gearing up for their nesting. That's the biggest energy expenditure of the year often, and there's not that much native food out there. So those 2 times really can help increase survival rates. Then also, when they've been feeding throughout the year, it increases their just kind of survival rates, but also just their body condition. They tend to be healthier, they're not starving. And so that actually increases the number of fledged young that they have during their nesting period. So, birds lay eggs. And these eggs, they can lay anywhere from 1 or 2 eggs. They can lay up to a dozen, depending on the species. And so then no matter how many eggs they lay, their goal is to get as many of those to fledge, which is when the birds are independent of their parents. They can fly and literally fly away and leave the nest. So that is the number that we really look at. It's how many survive, and that increases when you feed the birds. Another thing people often worry about is like, ooh, I want to start feeding the birds, but then I'm going to go on vacation for a month. Like, what's going to happen? Birds don't become dependent on humans. They will certainly act like it. Some morning, if your bird feeder is empty and they see you there, they will act like their world is about to end. But they're fine. Even your birds, which you think are at your feeder all day, it's probably 50 different birds that look the same. They're hitting dozens of other bird feeders, as well as, excuse me, finding their natural food. So they're not dependent on you, no matter how guilty they try to make you feed. All right. Another question we often get is, when do you feed the birds? When's the best time of year to feed the birds? So the one that everyone always thinks of, and kind of the one we were all brought up listening to, is winter. It's cold. Birds need a lot of energy just to keep their bodies warm, and food is harder to find, especially if it's under snow. That is totally true. But then a lot of people don't think about spring. Right now, the weather's nice, the grass is starting to green up. Birds don't eat grass as a general rule. So even though it looks beautiful and it's starting to look really great, there's not new food for them. All the plants that put out seeds put them out last fall, and so they were eaten over the winter. So this is actually the lowest point of the year for any sort of natural seeds. The insects are
Excuse me,
just getting started.
Jen. Oh,
Yeah.
sorry about, I don't think your slides are advancing. We're still seeing why feed birds.
Oh, strange. Your
Yeah, sorry
screen
about that.
sharing is paused. That's interesting. How do I unpause? Dock to bottom, recording in the cloud.
Yeah, we don't want that. Will it let you stop and restart?
Stop share? I guess so. Let's try that.
Let's do that. Yeah, I know earlier this morning my internet was kind of off and wasn't streaming well.
Do you see when to feed birds?
Yes, and I think you've got two things listed. Yes, winter,
Yep,
spring.
winter, spring. So I was just talking about spring. Okay, sorry about that,
Okay,
guys.
perfect. No
Um,
problem. Thank you.
there we go. Yeah, interrupt next time if that's happening, because it was going just fine on my screen. Perfect. Okay, so spring. So we just talked about that. So there's not as much food out there for them, but this is a huge time for them. They are coming, if they're migrating, they're just coming back from migration. So that was a huge energy pull that they just had, and they're getting ready to nest, which means they have to find territories, find a mate, defend a territory, create a nest, and then for the females, they have to start, getting their body conditioned to actually start growing those eggs in their body. Like I said, the new seeds aren't available yet. Summer's, kind of peak time for insects and everything. So that's great. But that's also when the birds are so busy raising their nestlings and their fledglings. So they are constantly running out, finding bugs, feeding their babies. Kind of a fun fact, all the birds that eat seed, almost none of them actually feed seed to their young. The young are growing so fast, they need a super high protein, and it's almost exclusively insects. The few exceptions are, like doves are an exception. They have a whole crazy other thing. And the goldfinches actually will feed their babies regurgitated seeds. But everybody else, even if the adults are eating seeds, they're feeding their baby bugs. So when you're feeding them, what you're really doing is like giving the parents a quick stop to grab some food. And then they're going to go off and find caterpillars for their young. Throughout the summer, they're still nesting, even late summer. A lot of our birds will even have a second clutch. So if they'll lay eggs, raise them, they'll fly off, because most of the birds, it only takes about a month. If they aren't still in good condition, the parents are in good health condition, there's good food available in the wild, they'll go for a second clutch, occasionally even a third, like quail. Definitely by the end of summer, sometimes people see a third wave of little babies coming through. And then fall again. So fall, That's when they need to, if they're going to migrate, they need to start building up their fat reserves for that. If they're going to stay in Central Oregon for the winter, they're also going to build up their fat reserves just, to give them some extra energy. This is when a lot of our native plants are putting out seeds, but the insects start to decline. So it's still a great time to feed them. They're just looking for extra food anywhere. Okay. If you're going to feed in the backyard, the number one seed that you should always feed, and almost everybody knows, is sunflower seed. It is the most universally liked by all the birds. It's really high in fat and some protein too. So it's a really good food for them. The black oil sunflower is kind of the favorite because it is the highest fat in a thinner shell. So it's easy for the birds to eat it. So who likes that? So a lot of our backyard birds, this is their favorite seed. So a super common one we see around here are the house finches. They're the little finches, the little red finches that are out there at your feeders. This is a male. So you can see he's got kind of the red cap and a red breast. The female is just kind of his same shape and size, but she doesn't have the red. She's just kind of a streaky brown. So that's often when you see a group of them together. You'll see the red ones, which are the males, and then the streaky ones. We have a few other colorful finches. House finch, I would say, is 90% of the red finches you'll see outside. We do also get Cassin's finches. And you can see he's a little bit different in that he's a little more of a raspberry pink, and it's not quite so evenly. You can kind of see he has the brown markings, and then the red kind of covers it up a little bit. Super pretty. They're just a different color and really out there as well. And then we can get purple finches. These are much less common here in Central Oregon. If you lived over in the valley, you'd get more of the purple finch. And he's just kind of this pinkish red, purpley color over his whole body, not just his front, not just his top, his whole body. Again, the females are just kind of brown and streaky. So female identifying can be a little trickier. So whenever you see it, the good thing about finches, they hang out in groups. So look for the bright ones, identify them, and then assume those little brown ones hanging out with them are just their females or their young. Another really popular bird that loves sunflower seeds are the chickadees. Wherever you live in the US, there's 5 or 6 different species, depending how they're naming them these days, throughout the US. So almost anywhere you live, there'll be a chickadee. The one we have here in Central Oregon is called the mountain chickadee. And he is a little different and he's easy to identify. If you see, he's got like a little white eyebrow above his eye. That's what gives him away, like the black cap chickadee, which is common, just has a solid black cap. So mountain chickadees, these are everybody's favorites. This is also known as the cheeseburger bird. I didn't know that till I moved to Central Oregon, but people are always like, what's the cheeseburger bird? And I'm like, so their little call that they give is, it's described in the book as Phoebe, Phoebe, but a lot of people, cheeseburger. So if you hear that, that's a chickadee. And so for us, it's going to be a mountain chickadee most of the time. Another guy that's really common in our backyards, which is fun in Central Oregon because he's not really common a lot of other places in the West, is the pygmy nuthatch. So he's the smallest of the nuthatches. We have a couple in the area. I'll show some more coming up. He's the smallest, but he is the most common and the most vocal. These guys are usually in little family groups in your backyard. They're going up and down the trees. They're chittering nonstop. So when you have them, you usually know them. They're super fun to watch. Only a little bad thing about them is they are a cavity nester. So they like to nest in boxes or in hollow trees. And believe it or not, these guys can excavate their own hole in a tree. So not just the bigger woodpeckers. Birds like the chickadees also nest in tree cavities, and we'll talk to nesting later on when we get by. But this pygmy nuthatch, he can actually peck his own hole in a tree or your house. So that is one that people often we hear about. If people come in and say, I have a baby woodpecker attacking my house, it's a pygmy nuthatch, and we've got solutions for that. We'll get to that in the nesting section. Here's another nuthatch that we have. So he's the white-breasted nuthatch, a little bigger. He's showing the typical nuthatch behavior. So if you see a bird on a tree trunk and he goes head down and he starts walking down the tree, it's probably a nuthatch. They have special feet. Most birds have 4 toes. A lot of them have 3 in the front, 1 in the back. He's got 2 toes in the front and 2 in the back, so he can go down and hang on just as well as he can go up. So that's a little fun nuthatch trick. And then our third nuthatch is the red-breasted nuthatch. These guys are usually more higher elevation. We get some of them, on the west side of Bend. or in sisters for sure. But if you go up hiking in the mountains and you hear nuthatches, it's probably going to be these guys. Okay, we have some bigger birds too. We have the evening grosbeak. And the first thing I like to tell people is the name grosbeak is nothing gross about his beak. It's German for big. So he's big beak, which when you look at his beak, that makes total sense. This is also when we get calls, hey, I got a flock of parrots in my backyard. Means the grosbeaks are in town. So the evening grosbeak, beautiful bird. They like to come in flocks. So you can get flocks of 4 to 10 to even 20. So when they come, they make a big impact. Love sunflower seeds. That's what they're going to come for at your feeders. And we tend to get them mostly spring and fall. They winter further south and they tend to nest further north. So we kind of get them just during their migration. A few stick around and nest, but not a ton. So it's something that's really fun to see spring and fall. Everybody gets excited when they come because they're so fun to watch. And then during the summer, we get another grosbeak. This is the black-headed grosbeak. It's one of the well-named birds that actually makes sense when you look at them. Some of the names don't always seem to jive, but this one does. So he comes just in the summer. So he migrates away for the winter. And then he will be here in the summer. This is a male. The females are kind of brown and streaky, and they will show up and nest here. And they don't form flocks. You usually just see the pair of them. And they're kind of fun because they'll come to your feeder one at a time. So when the female's on the nest, the male will come and eat, and then he will disappear and then relieve her off the nest, and then she will come and eat. So it's kind of fun to see that they must be nesting nearby. Again, the big beak. And if any of you guys are East Coast or Midwest transplants, I know you all miss the cardinal. We all miss the cardinals. But cardinals are also a grosbeak, which makes sense when you think about their big beak. So same general body shape. Still love those sunflower seeds. Okay. So the sunflower seeds are the most popular seed, for a wide variety of birds. There are still some that struggle to crack that seed. And so our most popular seed of all is actually the sunflower chips. These are sunflower seeds where they've taken off the shells, and then they usually kind of get chipped up. You can see they're kind of like in halves and quarters. It's a huge benefit for everybody. For us, it's nice because you don't have the empty shells getting dropped to the ground. All birds, when they eat, they actually crack the shell with their beak and their tongue and they usually drop the shells just below the feeder. So you have to do some cleanup under there, or else you get a big pile of shells. With the sunflower chips, you don't have to worry about that because there's no shells. That also means they won't grow. And that's kind of a great thing with any of our seeds that are out of the shell is you don't get the plants growing underneath. Now, usually sunflowers don't really bother people because everyone loves sunflowers, but other bird food, you don't necessarily want it growing in your yard. So this is a really clean option. The birds love it too, because they can just grab and go. They don't have to stay and chip it open. And then even the really tiny birds that struggle with the seed, with the shell, can still enjoy the seed. So here kind of shows a good blend. So just whenever you're looking for bird seed, if it has the shells on, keep this in mind. You want it to be pretty dark because most of what birds want are sunflower seeds. So they're going to be the black shelled ones. On this picture, we see both the black oil sunflower, the bigger striped sunflower, which has, the kind of the stripes on it, which is like what we eat when we eat sunflower seeds. It's harder for a lot of the birds. The grosbeaks really like them, thus cardinals. So if you're from the Midwest, again, you've seen a lot of these in your seeds. The little white, the one that looks like a small white sunflower is called safflower. And that is a high oil one too. So it's popular with some birds, just gives a little more variety. And then the little tiny white seed you see here, that's called millet. Millet's actually a grass seed. If you've ever had parakeets, that's what the parakeets love to eat. The millet, for the most part, is going to get kicked out of your feeder onto the ground. The birds that come to your feeder, so all the little songbirds that come up your feeder, they don't want it. They want the higher fat sunflower seed. Millet is more starchy. It's going to end up on the ground, and that's what your ground feeders like. So that's going to be the dove, the quail, the juncos, things like that, and we'll go through them in a minute. But that's the big thing that people in their minds always think, I want the little birds at my feeder, so I'm going to get the little seed and put it in there. They're not going to like it. They're going to kick through that and look for the good stuff. It's kind of the opposite. The little birds like the bigger seed. The bigger birds like the little seed. Mother Nature, can't argue with her. Okay, so here's the millet again, kind of showing that. So this is what you don't really want to put much of this in your feeder. You want to put this on the ground because that's where it's going to end up anyway. So the birds that like that are what we call our ground feeding birds. So our doves. So our native dove to the area is the mourning dove. And they're beautiful and they're sweet. And you've probably heard their calls. They kind of almost sound like an owl, kind of a hoo, 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 hoo. And fun thing is look at how his name is spelled, because a lot of people, when you just hear the word mourning dove, say, oh, you must see him in the morning or something like that. Well, actually, they're named mourning, like they're sad. And that's because when they heard their call, they were like, oh, they sound really sad, like somebody must have died or something. So they're mourning. So that's actually where the name comes from. We have a newer dove to Central Oregon called the Eurasian collared dove. From the name Eurasian, you're probably guessing it's not native to North America, and that is true. It is from Europe and Asia. It's bigger than our mourning dove, same kind of gray color. The big thing, you can see the collar around his neck. They have kind of a weird call. It kind of sounds like a bird being startled. And they're kind of interesting because they were not common here in Central Oregon. When I moved here in 2000, I saw none. And I would say in the early 2000s, like a few were spotted. So it was kind of interesting, like, oh, hey, saw this crazy bird. But they have gradually become more and more numerous, and they're kind of spreading throughout North America. And so now they're pretty common in Central Oregon. Probably released from pet birds or, from dove breeders. There's no, I haven't heard of any other way where they came to North America naturally. So that's just something that things do change over time, and that, can be upsetting to some people who don't get their mourning doves anymore, but now get their collared doves. But some change is always, nature is never static. Nature is always changing. Sometimes because of us, we're kind of accelerating the change, which is not always great for our native birds, but it's just something to keep in mind. All right, everybody's favorite, the California quail. These guys are great. They are a ground feeder. They run around on the ground, as you know, feed down there. This is a male, and so he's got that big top knot and the really bright colors. On my next slide, here's one, and that's 3 males, and then the one on the top left is a female. So you can see she doesn't have that black face, and she's got just a little tiny little crest. These guys are here year round, as you can tell. Here they are in the snow. And they have lots of babies in the summer. So you'll see lots of little baby quail running around. And that's kind of something to keep in mind with the quail is they start off, and there's dad and mom with 15 little babies between them. And then as they come to your house every day, there's fewer and fewer. It's a dangerous life down there. There's lots of issues with, cats as well as native predators, birds of prey, getting them. So everybody loves a quail, unfortunately, not just people. So they're a real fun one to feed and kind of help them out, and you really get to know their personalities well. Another thing I was going to bring up is this picture really shows it. Do you see how round they are? They look like little balls. Let me see if I can go back. Well, he's still kind of chunky even in the summer. But this is something with all birds. Sometimes we get calls because people say, oh, there's a bird. I think he's sick because he's really puffed up. If a bird is acting perky and normal and kind of going about his thing and are just super puffy, that is their way to insulate against the cold. They are basically wearing a down jacket all year, and every feather actually has a little muscle connected where it connects to the skin, so they can lay their feathers flat when it's hot and kind of press it against their body. And then if it's cold, they can fluff them up. And then with each feather interlocking, it creates little air pockets to keep them warm. So they are wearing down jackets, and then in the winter, you can kind of tell the temperature in the morning by how poofy your birds look. Here's another one that we have, the dark-eyed junco, and sometimes people call them the Oregon junco. The dark-eyed junco is found throughout North America, but there's a few different color variations. So this is kind of our Northwest variation, and it's called the Oregon junco. Of course, why not? So he's got the real black hood. He's actually a sparrow. So he's a type of sparrow. And sparrows, as a general rule, like to feed on the ground and also kind of nest pretty low. So he's going to nest in bushes, not up in trees, but lower, like in shrubby bushes or deep grasses. So that's something else we'll talk about when we get to nesting. All right, here's another one that's really fun, who's kind of a spring and fall One, the white-crowned sparrow. So he comes through and he's got the white stripes on his head. That's his name. And so he's usually here through the spring and fall, hopping around on the ground under your feeders. Here's another one, the house sparrow. This is one that is actually, his full name is the Eurasian house sparrow. He's not native. This is what we call the parking lot bird. When you go to McDonald's, when you go to the Costco parking lot, there's lots of these birds around. They do really well with people. They adapt really well. They take advantage of our food and the cracks in our houses to live in. So they've been spreading throughout North America as well. And here's the female. So there you can kind of see a male a little bit out of focus in the back and the female up front. Okay, peanuts is another food that you can feed, both in and out of the shell. High fat, again, which is what animals like. They need that energy. Obviously, depending on the size of the bird, what they can eat. So the ones in the shell are really popular with our jays. Our most common jay, the Steller jay, kind of in the woodsy side of Central Oregon. If you live more in the forest, you're going to see these guys with their black crest. If you live more in the open, urban, or sagey areas, you're going to get more of the California scrub jay. Both are native. Jays are smart. They're part of the jay corvid family. They're kind of sassy, so they're pretty fun to have around. They're definitely always entertaining. We also get a special jay. We are the very northwest edge of the pinion jay. They're beautiful. They're kind of this, sky blue gray color, but they come in big flocks by up 50 to 100 to 200 of them even. So when they come, they can really empty out your feeders. We have cages that you can put around feeders if you get inundated with these guys. But when they come, it's super special because it's an amazing thing. And most places in the West don't have these. Okay, another little seed you can feed, the Niger or the thistle seed. It's usually called Niger. It used to be called thistle more, but everybody got it confused with like the weed, the thistle. This, if it could grow, actually looks like a little coreopsis. It's kind of a pretty little flower, but it's a tropical plant, does not grow anywhere in North America. So it's all imported, and it is sterilized when it's brought in, so it won't grow. But it's a specialized food for our goldfinches. So our goldfinches are the smaller finches, smaller than the house finch that we talked about earlier. So these are our teeny tiny little guys. They're so pretty. We love them. And you can see they've got those teeny tiny beaks, and they're going to reach into, this is a finch feeder, which has a really tiny opening so that only the little birds can get in and get that seed. This kind of excludes the bigger birds because the goldfinches kind of are a low man on a totem pole. They get kicked off the feeder by the bigger birds often. So this is the American goldfinch, the male in the summer, and they are just gorgeous. Then we have the female. She doesn't have the little black cap, a little duller, as a lot of female birds are. Then we also have lesser goldfinches. So right in the middle of the screen here, the one on the left with the solid black cap and the bright yellow body, that is the American goldfinch. The one on the right, he's got a black cap, but he's kind of got like a little olivey back. That is the lesser goldfinch. Lesser, I guess, just because they're a tiny bit smaller, but they're still beautiful. And we have them both here year round. Tricky thing about having them here, a lot of people think that goldfinches migrate. Look at that guy on the very bottom there. That's that super bright yellow American goldfinch in the winter. They lose their bright yellow color. He still has the black and white wing, but he looks a lot duller. So a lot of people don't realize that they're still here. The other little finch we have on those top couple perches are the pine siskins. These guys are just all over streaky brown. When they fly, they've got a little bit of flash of yellow on their wing. Super social. So when you have them, you can have them. And these are the ones that some years we have a ton and some years we have none. This past year, we have not had very many of them. They're called eruptive migrants. So they don't migrate north and south with the seasons. Instead, they, as huge flocks, will migrate throughout the West, depending on where the food is really good. Because there's different regions that have a wet year, a dry year. All the native plants put out lots of seeds, not so many. So they, as this giant conglomerate, kind of move around the West, depending on where the native food is good. So some years we have a lot, some years we don't. All right. Next food that you can put out besides the seeds are suet. Suet is rendered beef kidney fat, which doesn't sound great, and your doctors will tell you is not heart healthy, but for birds, it's great. It's a super high concentrated form of fat and protein and energy. And a lot of the birds that eat it tend to be insect eating birds. So this is kind of like an insect substitute. On the top of these cages, we have that red-breasted nuthatch again that we saw earlier, because he'll also eat seed. At the bottom, we have these bush tits. These guys are great. I wish we had more of them. If you live on the west side of town, you might see a little bit more. They come around in flocks. They are super tiny. They kind of look like a little powder puff with a tail. And they flock around suet. They almost never eat seed, so they'll just come to your suet. And the cool thing is the males and the females look identical except for their eye. Males have a black eye, females have this kind of yellowish light ring around it. So if you can get close enough to get your binoculars on them, you can actually tell them apart, which is kind of fun. The other big suet eaters are woodpeckers. And we have a bunch here in Central Oregon. The most common ones coming to your backyard would be a hairy woodpecker. So this is one of them. This feeder that he's on is called a tail prop feeder, and he's showing you why. Woodpeckers, when they're pecking on trees, to like go in after insects, they grab on with their feet, and then they have really rigid tail feathers, which they can prop against the tree to kind of make a tripod. Because if you're going to be pounding into a tree, you need a solid base. So they like to brace their tail on something. And so these tail prop feeders just give them something to hold on to. So this is the hairy woodpecker. You can tell he's a male because he's got a little bit of red on the back of his head. Females are just black and white. Another one that we get, the downy woodpecker. And they virtually look identical except for their size. This is the exact same feeder for both of these, and I'll show that again. So this one you can see is much bigger. And if you look at his beak is almost as big as his head, like almost as long as the depth of his head. This guy is about half the size, and his beak kind of looks short and stumpy. It's only like half the size of his head. So that's the easiest way to tell them apart. They have a slightly different feathers, but it's super hard to tell. But this again is a male. Females wouldn't have that little bit of red. Exact same size feeder again, with the biggest bird, which in Central Oregon, we don't get a ton of. The more you're towards the mountains, towards Sisters, you'll sometimes see them. But this is the pileated woodpecker. This is woody woodpecker. This is the big one. They are gorgeous. They are crazy big. Super fun to see. I wish we had more of them in Central Oregon, but it's a treat when you see them because you can't miss them. They're huge. And then our most common woodpecker, the flicker. So yes, the flicker is a woodpecker, even though he's not black and white. He's kind of got different colors. But he's super common in Central Oregon. Lives here year round. Pretty much anywhere with trees, you're going to have flickers. This is the male, and you can see he's got a little red mustache. Females don't have that little red mustache. All woodpeckers nest in cavities in trees. They can excavate their own by digging them out, or they will also use nesting boxes. Another bird that eats suet are the starlings. These guys kind of get a bad name. Again, this is the European starling. This is not native to North America. He was released in New York back in the early 1800s. This is the best story with this is that all the birds that were named in Shakespeare were released in the US to bring European culture to North America. So this is the culture we got. These guys do really well around people, kind of like the house sparrows. So they've spread across North America. So it's kind of a love-hate relationship. They're not really supposed to be here. They are still cool birds. They do compete against our native birds for nesting areas and food. So pro con, is it good? Is it bad? That's kind of a deeper question there. But these guys are called starlings, and this picture really shows it. If you look at their feathers, they're kind of an iridescent, purpley blue color the whole year. But when they get their new feathers out, they have these little white tips. And if you actually kind of look in, those tips will wear off. It's a softer part of the feather. So these guys will come out in winter and look like this. Starling, little star, is how they got their name. And then by spring, they're going to look all kind of black and glossy. It's the same feathers. They didn't change their feathers. They just wore the tips off, which is kind of interesting. Suet can be fed in a feeder also that can keep the bigger birds and squirrels off. And that's what this is right here. So this is kind of a cage within a cage. So the little birds will go right in. Here you can even see the downy woodpecker can fit in. The flicker can still reach the food because he's got that really long beak. But your other birds, starlings, jays, can't get at it. Okay, another type of food to put out is the nectar, and it is time to start putting it out. People are seeing more and more hummingbirds. Most of our hummingbirds migrate south for the winter, and so they've just been showing back up, except for one that I'll show you in the next one. So this is the rufous hummingbird, by far the most common one. They drink a lot of nectar, and nectar is just sugar water, which replicates, what the flowers are putting out. Fun fact, he doesn't suck it up his beak like a straw. A lot of people think he does. He actually laps it up like a dog. His tongue can extend about another beak's length beyond the end of his beak to reach into flowers and lap that up. If you have a fun feeder like this where it's clear on the bottom, you can actually see their tongue go in and lap it up. The Anna's hummingbird. So this one you can see he's got the red throat, but also red on top of the head. This is our tough guy. He can spend the entire winter here. And I've had some couple blocks from my house all winter. I hear them all winter. Some of them will migrate over the mountain into the valley. So they might go over just for a month or two and then come back. Some stay in Central Oregon all winter. A few do migrate, so they can kind of do whatever they feel like. The ones that stay here, even before people fed them from feeders, they did stay here. And what they would do is either find little hibernating insects, or they will actually drink the sap from trees, from where sapsuckers, another type of woodpecker, peck into your trees. So it's pretty amazing that they can survive here in Central Oregon with virtually no flowers. The flowers that are starting to bloom right now, the native ones, like manzanita is already blooming. These guys love those. Calliope hummingbird, this is another one we have. He's kind of fun because his throat is streaky instead of kind of being a solid thing. Hummingbirds are tricky to identify. They're small, they're fast, they move around a lot. So the males are the easiest to identify when they show this gorget is what they call it. They're kind of decorative feathers on their neck, which they're using to show off to females and to other males. Another nectar eater, we don't get a ton of them here, but close to the river, you'll see them, Bullock's orioles. They eat insects. They're the ones that will eat grape jelly or orange slices, or they'll sometimes come to your hummingbird feeder as well. And they make hanging nests of woven grass that'll be often in cottonwoods is kind of their preferred habitat. So as closer to the river, you might see these guys in your yard. All right. Another one who is a fruit eater, but also a seed eater is the American robin. Here he is eating some mountain ash, loves those. But they are also super common at your feeders, especially sunflower seeds out of the shell, because they eat a lot of insects during the summer and they eat a lot of worms and stuff like that. So in the winter, they'll eat a lot of seeds as well. Fun fact, we actually might have more robins in the winter in Central Oregon than we do in the summer. Again, any transplants from the Midwest, it's spring when the robins come back. Our robins never leave, and we actually get more in the winter because they come to Central Oregon to eat the juniper berries. That is one of their native food sources. So all the Canadian robins and Alaskan robins come down to Central Oregon to winter in our tropical climates and eat our juniper berries. Cedar waxwings. These guys are beautiful. They're here year round. If you identify their call, you'll realize you hear them downtown. We hear them in parking lots. We hear them outside of our store all the time. They're up in the treetops, eating berries and eating bugs. Okay. Second, so food's kind of a big component for attracting animals to your yard, obviously, but it's not the only one. Water. We are in a desert. Water is crucial for the birds. So the best way to draw birds into your yard is actually to offer them some sort of water. So this can be a bird bath. Birds like shallow water. So that's one thing. Even if you live along the river and have the river coursing through, it's deep. The birds aren't going to jump. They can't swim in the river, these little songbirds. So they want something really shallow. They would love to have a 1/4 inch of water. Of course, we know in the summer that's going to evaporate in like 2 hours. So it's always the battle to like fill up the bird bath enough that it's full, but not too deep for the birds. This also shows a little dripper on it, a way to add some fresh water. That birds like any sort of sound of moving water, just like we do. The bluebirds rarely come to our feeders. They'll eat bugs and suet that we put out, but they're not big seed eaters. but water is a great way to bring them in. So this is the western bluebird, and this shows a male in the back, a female in the front. So they blue, kind of a bright blue on the back, the red on the front. And then we also get mountain bluebirds. These guys are gorgeous. Again, the further west, like towards Sisters, you'll see more of them, but they're like an electric sky blue, and they are just so pretty. The robins obviously love water, and here's a bird bath showing a heater in it. So even in the winter, you can keep your bird baths ice-free. And a lot of people are amazed when you put out a heated bird bath or put a de-icer in your bird bath in the winter, how many birds you get, because it's harder for the birds to find water in the winter because most of it's frozen. Varied thrush. This is a relative of the robin. You can kind of see the same body shape, that bright orange. We get these guys in our yards in the winter. So these are altitudinal migrants. So they don't migrate north and south, spring and fall. They migrate up and down in elevation. So in the winter, they'll come down because lower elevation, there's less snow. So they'll often hang out in our yards over the winter. And then now they're kind of disappearing again. As it thaws out, and they'll start going up the mountain. And they'll end up nesting up, halfway up the mountains in the forests. All right. Water can also be supernatural. A lot of people have ponds in their backyard, even if you've got, if you've got fish or you've just got a pond. The key is you want to have somewhere shallow that they can get in. They're not going to want to jump in the deep end, but you see kind of the rocks at the edge. Take a rock, kind of tilt it under the water so it kind of gradually goes in. Birds will love that. Birds love a water feature. If you've got like a little waterfall, you'll see that they're definitely attracted to that. Just like us, moving water means fresher water, a stagnant pond versus, a little waterfall. We love that. So birds, it attracts them. Okay, shelter. What do birds need for shelter? So the best thing you can do in your yard is have it to be dense, have many layers. A lot of birds will go into trees. They'll go into evergreens at night. They'll go in to get away from storms. They'll go into shrubs. So they also need places to, hide from predators. So the more complex your yard is, as far as different layers, different, evergreen versus non-evergreen, that is what birds are ideally looking for. This is obviously super lush, but the birds will love it. Another thing for shelter, which HOAs are not a fan of, is the brush pile. So it doesn't look like much, but to birds and a lot of small critters, this is amazing because there's all sorts of nooks and crannies. They can get in there, they can get away from predators, they can go in at night when it's cold, and it'll keep them protected from the elements. It doesn't have to be as big or elaborate as this, but even just, kind of leaving a little messy area in the back corner of your yard somewhere where you're not really looking at it, the messier it is, the more the birds are going to like it, because there's going to be lots of bugs hiding out in there too, which they're going to love to eat. And then it's a good, safe place to get away from predators. All right, final step, places to raise their young. So birds do different things depending on the type of bird. We have a lot of birds we call cavity nesters. So those are ones that either make their own hole, like in a tree, or they might use somebody else's hole in a tree. Bluebirds are one of these. And all of the birds that will nest in a cavity will usually nest in a nesting box. That's when we sell nesting boxes. It's kind of a fake cavity. They're super crucial, especially in neighborhoods and around your house, because birds like to nest in dead trees. If a bird is going to go and peck a hole in a living ponderosa pine, the sap is going to come start pouring out, the tree's defense to having any sort of a hole in it. So they're going to get sap on them. That's less ideal. What they would love to do is find a dead tree, because then they can peck a hole in it, no sap to deal with. Plus the inside may have been rotting out already, so it's softer and easier to excavate. Tricky thing is, obviously, you don't want to have a dead tree right next to your house that falls over and hurts something. So we tend to take out a lot of the dead trees in our neighborhoods and around our homes. So nesting boxes are a great way to kind of compensate for that. Bluebirds use our nesting boxes. So both types, the Western and the mountain. The hole size of a nest box is super important. So I know sometimes you find really cute nest boxes like at a craft fair, and you put them up and you're like, why aren't the birds using them? Sometimes the hole they put them in is way too big or way too small. Obviously the hole's too small, the bird can't even fit in, so they won't use it. If the hole is too big, they might go in, but that means a bigger bird could come in and kick them out. So most birds want a hole that they can barely squeeze through, because then that means nobody bigger than them can come in and kick them out. So hole size is super important, as well as, the overall internal dimensions of the box. So with ours, we sell 1 9/16 inch openings, which seems incredibly particular. Like in nature, are they really making them that? But that is the perfect size hole to let our Western and mountain bluebirds in, but keep a starling out. Remember, we talked about those starlings, that they're not native. They are also cavity nesters. They're a little bit fatter and chunkier, so they can't fit in the 1 9/16 inch hole. So this gives our native birds a chance to use it. Another cool thing you see here is the bluebird carrying in a big juicy worm for the babies. They feed their babies almost exclusively insects, and we'll talk about that at the end. 2 of our swallows, we have 6 different swallows. So swallows are the birds you see when you go down to the river, or any of what that are like swooping around catching bugs in the air. So first of all, we love swallows because they are catching mosquitoes. They are catching all those little flying insects up in the air. So they are great to have around. 2 of the 6 species will nest in boxes. Tree swallows, makes sense, they nest in trees, and the violet green swallow. They're purple and green, so that's how they got their name. So those 2 will use nesting boxes. Other swallows will not. Other ones do different things. So the one that people often have issues with are barn swallows. They're the ones that build those cup nests up underneath the eaves of old barns. They won't use boxes. So, that's a whole other issue. So sometimes people get confused. They're like, I've swallow nesting, I'll just swallow box. That'll take care of the problem. Well, it depends what species you have. So that's a great thing. You can always come into the store. Like, we know the different birds we have. We know what they all need. So, bring pictures, bring descriptions, and we'll help you figure out, a solution if you have a problem. Oh, I did have the violet green. I forgot that. His back's kind of green. His wings are kind of violet. If he's in the sun just right, it's really iridescent. They're super cute. And these guys, bluebirds tend to be more in open areas. So a lot of people want to have bluebirds. So they'll like, I'm going to get a bluebird box. I want to have bluebirds in my yard. If you've never seen a bluebird in your yard, putting a box up isn't going to bring them in. You probably don't have the right habitat to begin with. But swallows are throughout town. I think I haven't been anywhere in Central Oregon that I haven't seen a swallow. Then we have smaller birds that use boxes. So here's the black-capped chickadee. We talked about ours is the mountain chickadee. They use a smaller hole size, 1 1/8 to 1 1/4 inch size hole. Again, a chickadee might use a bluebird box. They can. I mean, obviously they can fit in a bigger hole, but then they run the risk that a bigger bird could come in and kick them out. So that's why we have different specific sizes for these birds. Again, look what he's carrying, caterpillar. We're going to talk about that. Inside the nest box, the parents are going to bring in all sorts of nesting material. Different species use different materials. Here's a little nest of chickadees. You can see they've got grass, they've got some sort of hair, they've got moss. They kind of have little specialties, and they build in layers too. So the bottom will be sticks and rougher, and then it'll get smaller and smoother and softer the closer they are to the babies. Having that bottom layer be kind of porous lets water and other stuff get through. So they've engineered these into boxes pretty amazingly. We sell boxes that you can look in the top like this to check on them. And all of the boxes that we sell also have a way to clean them out at the end of the season. Here are some bluebirds. These are baby bluebirds. They're adorable. They have these little speckles when they're still in the nest. So again, you can see a totally different kind of nest. Like this one is much rougher, coarser, a lot more grass, no moss, none of that other stuff. So that's just what they choose to do. But you can kind of see under the babies, it gets finer and finer. The parents have like orchestrated that little cup to be soft for them. Nesting material is a great way to support all birds, whether they nest in a box or whether they're going to make a cup nest in a tree. So like robins don't ever use boxes. They're going to, build a nest in a tree, but they all need nesting material. So some of the nesting material is just stuff from your yard and garden, pine needles, grasses. These are things that they use. So this is kind of a reminder, like, don't keep your yard too neat. There's a reason for that. Leave a little scruffiness for the birds to come and use. Another thing they like to use are animal hair, so wool. This is actually a natural cotton. So you can put stuff like that out for them as well, and they will come. This is a little goldfinch coming to pull some out. One thing we often hear about and we don't recommend is dryer lint. A lot of people are like, oh, I put my dryer lint out. It has a lot of synthetics mixed in. The fibers are so tiny that they're not actually structurally sound. And if you use, depending on fabric softeners or any other scents and other chemicals in your washers, it's not good for the birds. So we don't recommend that, but there's a lot of other natural options out there. Here's the robin, like we talked about. Robins will nest just about anywhere. Probably everybody's had a robin nest in a really weird part of their house. If there's anything flat enough to put a nest on it, they'll probably try. But they're super fun to watch. A lot of times that gives you an opportunity to see them up close because they're tucked under your eave or right outside a window, right over your front door sometimes. But it's a great opportunity to watch them. And they're usually, from building the nest, laying eggs to the baby's fledging, is 4 to 6 weeks total. It's amazing how fast it goes. They go from an egg to a flying adult-sized bird. Another type of nest you don't often think about are hummingbird nests. Because they're almost impossible to find. I've seen one in my entire life that I've found totally by chance. But they build their nests out of spider webs and moss and lichen. So it's pretty amazing. So they grab spider webs and they kind of weave them around, and they take other little natural materials and kind of stick it together with the spider web. Then the cool thing is, and then they lay 2 tiny jelly bean sized eggs in it. As the babies grow, the nest, because it's held together with the cobwebs, can actually stretch. By the time the babies fledge, it's kind of stretched out and looks, kind of like an old sock. But it's pretty amazing to see. We're in Central Oregon. We got a lot of birds. And in your backyard, you might have a really crazy nest, like the osprey, if you live close to the river. Ospreys are doing really well. They nest up and down along the river using all sorts of stuff, big sticks, stuff like that. So a nest can be anything in Central Oregon, which is awesome. Okay, so we kind of went over the 4 things. So just remember, there's different types of food you can put out. Water is always important. Shelter, having a varied, don't have a pristine lawn with like 1 tree in it. Have layers, have bushes, have places they can hide, have some evergreens out there. And then places to raise their young. Depending on the type of bird you have, that kind of determines what's going on in there. And then I just have a few more. I know I'm a little bit over. But just wanted to talk a little bit about, there's all the buzz right now is pollinators, which birds are pollinators. So birds are right in there with everything else, but a lot of insects are too. And the great thing about birds and pollinators going together is, like we've talked about, birds need insects. Birds eat insects. So any sort of garden you have that's attracting insects to it is also going to be essential for your birds. Obviously, the insects that we have here are hopefully mostly native insects. So that's where native plants tend to do better, just because the insects that have grown up, that live in this area, have adapted to our native plants. You can bring in some beautiful plants from other places. They just may not have the right food or structure that the insects need, and they may not be blooming at the right time for our insects, because our Central Oregon timeline is very different than a lot of other places in the world. So that's just something to keep in mind. Native plants support native insects, which support our native birds. So just some fun ones here. We've got swallowtails. Of course, all the buzz around monarchs, which a lot of us have all sorts of gardens set up for the monarchs. We may or may not see them. If you do see a monarch with these stickers on them, take a picture, because they are tracking them. It's pretty amazing. Tons of discussion now with our native bees. Kind of a lot of people still don't realize that honeybees are not native. They're European and African. But we have tons of native bees, which do not form the big hives, but are individual. They love old stems. They love brush piles. They love the messy parts of your garden. So keep some messy parts to your garden. And this is why, because the birds need, caterpillars is probably the #1 food that all baby birds need. So as much as you're trying to attract adult birds to your yard, if you want adult birds to reproduce and continue to exist in the future, they need to have successful babies. And that answer is really native bugs, especially caterpillars. And if any of you, and here's one more, hummingbirds. He's catching a spider there in a spider web. Hummingbirds eat tons of insects. So a lot of people get confused, like, I'm just feeding them sugar and water. Surely that's not good for them. The nectar they get from flowers is just like high energy food. their protein all comes from insects, and they eat tons of gnats, they eat tons of spiders. So they're good to have around in your yard too. And they're one of our #1 pollinators. This is a really cool book that I just love, and I've met Doug Ptolemy a few times, and he has a great story about how if everybody in their backyard was supporting native plants and native insects, we would have so many more birds in the US. And it's a really cool story. So just something to throw up there. And then I've hit the end and I'm ready for some questions.
Okay, so this is Marilyn. I will start with the first question that we had, and that is an unusual one. I had a nesting pair of crows that I started feeding last year. I did that so they wouldn't mind my dog around their nest. They have returned this year. I've fed them blueberries and peanuts and various other mixes I've found. Any other great suggestions to feed crows?
Crows. Okay, well, that's a funny one because we don't usually think of people wanting to feed and attract crows. Crows are omnivores, so crows will eat anything. Crows in the wild are eating bugs. They are eating berries. They actually scavenge a lot from carcasses. So you'll often see crows that, they would, in the native world, they would follow wolves and bears and scavenge off the carcasses. So they'll eat meat. Crows will also catch rodents and eat them. Crows will eat anything they can stick in their mouth, basically. So you can put out anything you want. Suet would be a good thing for it. Because again, they like that. Peanuts, they would go for as well, both in or out of the shell. I bet they would go for that as well. Feeding them, just how she brought it up, that she wanted to feed them to keep them from bothering her dog when they nest. That's kind of two different things. When birds nest, they do get protective of their nest. So the small birds, when they're nesting, they're deep in a bush and they're trying to hide because they are prey and they know it. Anyone would love to eat a bird egg because, especially with the price of eggs these days, everybody would go for their eggs. So they're always being very secretive and hiding. And so they don't draw attention to their nests. However, bigger birds, once you hit crows, jays, owls, hawks, eagles, they're big enough that they can defend their nests against predators. And a dog to a crow just looks like a little wolf. So they might still, if they're nesting there, if their dog's coming and they perceive the dog as a threat, they may, call at it and dive bomb it just to keep it away from the nest. That's not because they're hungry. They're just trying to keep the dog physically away from their nest. And this can happen with people too. If you have like a bird nesting right above your door and they start dive bombing you when you go by, they're just trying to defend their nest. They're worried that you're coming after them. But yeah.
Okay, thank you, Jen. This is Grady McMahon. We're going to take turns asking questions. So the next question is, if we have plants in the ground near or under the feeder, what are your thoughts on how the plants could be affected by seeds dropping? Should the plants be moved, or are there plants that are good for under feeders?
Good question. So I kind of have a two-prong approach for that. So one, if you have plants under your feeder, that's where like the no mess, we sell a lot of no mess variety seeds, which are kind of like the sunflower seeds out of the shell. Some have other, peanuts out of the shell, things like that, things that don't have a shell, because when the shells fall, they kind of build up, and shells have a lot of tannins in them. So they kind of naturally suppress plants underneath a feeder. So use a no mess seed. You might periodically just kind of rake around just to kind of break it up. And just remove, kind of like anything around a plant. Just you don't want it to get buried under too much stuff. Another thing though is often I tell people, especially if you have cats, don't put a lot of plants right under your bird feeder, because cats are, so that's, kind of an issue. Cats are a major predator of songbirds because they just kind of hunt for fun. They don't, they're not trying to survive. So they've got all day to kind of like go after the birds, and it doesn't matter if they're successful or not. But cats are sneak attackers. So cats like to hide under a bush, under grass, kind of, and they sit really still and they wait until their prey comes close and then they pounce. So if you've got a bunch of bushes or big plants underneath your feeder, that just gives cats a really good place to hide and ambush the birds. So we often recommend, put your feeders kind of out in the open or hang them over a space that's kind of open, because that just gives the birds are going to go to the ground for whatever seed might fall down there. So if they're in the open, they can see predators coming. And so then they have a chance to get away, versus if the seed falls right next to a bush with a cat hiding in it, that bush is going to get that. I mean, the cat is going to get the bird eventually. So use no mess seeds with no shells. That makes less of a mess. Rake it up periodically, but also kind of think about the fact, let's keep the feeders kind of open to protect the birds more.
Thank you very much. So we have another question here, and you may have already answered it, but in Central Oregon, do the feeder remains that end up on the ground attract rodents? It just moved. If you don't want rodents, do you recommend cleaning up the area under the feeder daily?
Right. So rodents can mean a lot of things. Like, I know a lot of people, if you're moving from like the Seattle or Portland areas, they have a lot of issues with rats. Luckily, we don't have too much of that issue yet, because that can be an issue. So anytime you have food sitting on the ground that rodents can get to, and that could be mice, it could be squirrels. Squirrels are actually a rodent, so are ground squirrels, chipmunks. They can get at it. So there's a few things you can do. The type of food. So obviously, if you're having issues with them under your feeder, you don't want food to fall. So that's picking the type of food. Don't get a food with a lot of millet in it. And that's one thing, depending on the blend of seed that you buy, the cheaper ones have more millet because millet's cheap. But that's all going to end up on the ground, and that's going to attract, more ground feeders, whether they be bird or rodent. So if you're trying to avoid that, think about the type of food you're putting up in the feeder. There's also different feeders that can have trays to catch the food so it doesn't go to the ground as much. And we have a type of food called the seed cylinder. So it's seeds held together with gelatin, kind of like, it looks like a big log. And that just tends to be less messy, because the birds, instead of coming to pick seed where they kind of, sometimes they're picking their favorite, sometimes they're high grading. They're like kids eating the M&Ms out of trail mix. They're like, I only want peanuts. I'm going to throw everything out. When you have a seed log where it's kind of solid, they have to come and work each piece out. So then they're going to eat it. A lot less hits the ground. So that's a lot less messy. And a lot of people like that, depending on their situation. We also have hot pepper foods. So we have hot pepper suet, seed cylinders. And how that works is mammals taste spice, all mammals. So, that's why spicy Mexican food is spicy for us. We taste the chili peppers. We taste that capsaicin. Birds don't. They don't taste it. They don't feel the heat. They don't even have the receptors in their body for that capsaicin to attach to and to make that kind of fiery feeling. So we have a lot of hot pepper foods now, which the birds will eat. It's just a different color to them. They don't really care. They'll get used to it. But to mammals, it's spicy. Works really well with squirrels. Works well with deer. I haven't tried it out much with like mice and rats. But they're mammals, so it would be spicy for them too. So that's another option. So a lot of it is kind of looking at your individual situation. And that's where I encourage you guys, if you have these questions, take pictures of your setup at home, showing, what the problem is. Come into the store, and then all of our staff were really well trained in that. We can look at it and we can say, okay, in this situation, I would recommend this, or let's get a tray on that feeder, because that'll solve some of the problem too. So there's lots of different things you can do. Good news, though, is rats are not a massive problem in Central Oregon. Obviously, so depending where you come from, if you're just feeling it out, it may not be a big issue. So just keep an eye on it and be aware.
I
Okay,
might
thanks, Jen.
add this. Oh, sorry. This is Marilyn. I happen to live in what they term the wildland urban interface. So I'm kind of on the outskirts and 7 acres of juniper and sagebrush, and we do have pack rats and we do have
Right.
mice. My husband has trapped many of them for our neighbors and us. So they are here, and I like your suggestion of the spicy seed. So thank you.
Yeah, and that's a difference too. So we do have the native pack rat, which is the bushy-tailed wood rat, is actually our native pack rat. And that's not a problem at all, really, in town. That's kind of as you go east out of town. But yeah, the problem that a lot of people coming from the port areas are having with non-native rats, so like Norway rats, roof rats, which were all brought over. The closer you are to a port city, the more of an issue that is, because they come over on the big shipping barges.
Okay, thank you.
Next, we have a question about garden protection. What type of garden protection can I use that doesn't harm the birds? Is netting okay? So covering up blueberries or things like that, how do we protect those?
Yes, so you can
And
get.
also, Jen, oh, sorry, will you please stop sharing your screen?
Oh, sure.
Thank you.
Perfect. Yeah, so you can get bird netting, which is just it's usually it has about like inch mesh, it's kind of a real fine black, almost invisible, and you can get it and put it around bushes, trees to keep birds from eating your fruit. And that does work really well. The biggest danger for that is birds getting tangled in it. And I
Mhm.
find they tend to get tangled in it when it's kind of loose. If it's kind of snug around, if you've got it stretched over, say got an arch over your garden and you're protecting your blueberries or something like that. If it's kind of stretched over it, that's good. The problem is if you just kind of throw it over and so the ends are just kind of hanging. When it's really loose like that, the birds can easily get tangled in it. So that's just something to keep an eye on, that are the birds going to get in that and get tangled in it. It happens occasionally. So I would say just watch it and try, are they getting in whatever part they're getting in, try and secure that up. Um, that bird netting can also work to keep birds from nesting, like we kind of talked about those barn swallows with those mud nests up against your house. You can actually kind of stretch it from your eaves to your house to kind of triangulate off that protected area where they want to nest. That can work really well too, but again, that's where you kind of want it stretched tight so they're not getting tangled up in it. So that works really well. You can also get Mylar strips. We sell some in the store that are either rolls of the strips, and it's just kind of that shiny, reflective, plasticky tape. And you can cut long strips and kind of tie them around. It works, it doesn't look the best, but it works really well for repelling birds from an area because it's going to flutter and it's really lightweight. It's going to flutter around in the wind, and the birds don't want that to touch them. They don't really know what that is. So, hanging one strip isn't just going to scare them away because it looks scary. They don't want to go near it. So you're going to have to, put long strips around the tree or bush that you're trying to protect, and that can help too. They just won't want to land anywhere where that could hit them. But I was gonna say another thing
Thank you.
is as far as like something to spray on them. A lot of times people are like, oh, I'm going to use that deer repellent to keep the birds off too. Birds have a really poor sense of smell. So most things that are smell, if it's something to spray to repel the birds, I almost guarantee it won't work. So don't bother. They
Okay,
won't
thank you.
smell it. It won't bother them at all.
All right, so we'll go to the next question. I've heard it is very important to clean bird feeders, suet feeders, and especially hummingbird feeders. What are your recommendations?
Yeah. Clean your feeders. I mean, it's kind of like anything, like they can get gunked up out there. And it kind of depends on the type of food you're feeding. Some foods are messier than others. Obviously, suet, it's kind of sticky, so it can get kind of gunky. So a lot of the feeders we sell, this is where something like recycled lumber or metal or plastic can be much more easily sterilized and cleaned than like a wooden feeder because you can soak it, you can really scrub it. You can put it in hot water with soap for a while to really get it clean. So that just makes it easier to clean. Then you can disinfect using like a dilute bleach, where you can dunk the whole thing in like a dilute bleach. Also a dilute like alcohol, like what is it, the 93% alcohol. You can spray that on and let it sit for 10 minutes, and that's just as effective as bleach. The key is, yeah, you want to disinfect them periodically. Hummingbird feeders, yeah, you definitely don't want that little black mold and funk that starts to grow in the cracks and crevices. So hummingbird feeders are important to keep clean because you're putting sugar water in it, so that is just like a breeding ground for different bacteria and stuff. A couple things you can do there. We have lots of little brushes to like help you get in the nooks and cranny. Picking a feeder that just doesn't have a lot of nooks and crannies. I mean, there's a lot, the feeders your grandma had with the bottle with the tiny opening that's really hard to clean out. There's so many better feeders now that are open, they're easy to clean. They're just a lot better. And then also with the hummingbirds, we've got something called Nectar Defender, which is just copper. It's just a copper in water that you add either to your nectar or it's pre-mixed into the nectar. It's an antimicrobial. It doesn't kill the microbes in it. It just interrupts their reproduction. So by putting that in the water, and it's the same level of copper that they would add to bird vitamins, like for captive birds. So it's been deemed totally safe. Birds can drink it and it's totally fine. And then that just keeps the black funk, the mold and stuff from growing in it. So it goes from in the summer when it's hot, when you put sugar water out, you should be changing it every 2 to 3 days for sure, because just think about it. If you put a glass of Kool-Aid on the counter, it would start growing stuff in it. Same thing. If you add this copper to it, they say it can last up to 2 weeks. I say we're so dusty here in Central Oregon and the pollen, you need to clean it every week just because otherwise it's going to be dried out and covered with pollen. But it really makes it a lot easier and really cuts down on the scrubbing time. Suet feeders, because of the fat, that's one where I love to get it and just soak it in some hot soapy water, scrub it out, disinfect it, put it back up, and you're good to go.
Okay, next question. How do I keep bees from nesting boxes?
Okay. My guess is it's probably actually yellow jackets, because most of our native bees are ground nesting.
Mm.
Honeybees, it could happen that they would set up a colony in there, but it's usually yellow jackets.
Mm-hmm.
So if it becomes a chronic problem, they usually attach a nest to the roof. Like if you open up a nesting box, the wasp will have attached its nest from the roof. A lot of people recommend take an unscented bar of soap and rub it, or even like a candle wax type thing, rub it on the roof, on the inside of the roof of your nest box, so that it's kind of slick and it's harder for them to attach one of their little paper wasp nests to it. So I've heard that. That and just monitoring it. With our nesting boxes that we put out, we recommend in the fall that you clean them out. And what that basically means is open it up, see if anything crazy happened in there the year. Sometimes there could be a nest and there were some eggs that didn't hatch. There could be a nestling that died. There could be mice that moved in and have a whole colony in there. There could be wasps that moved in. So in the fall or in the winter, open it up, pull out the old nesting material. You don't usually need to actually sterilize it unless something really crazy happened in there. Mainly what you're doing is just by removing the old nest, you are setting it up for the next spring when they start looking for nesting boxes. We just say it's like it's move-in ready. If birds will remove last year's nest sometimes and put a whole new nest in just to make sure that it's clean, no parasites from last year, nothing weird in it. If you give them an empty box, they're like, sweet, I'm ready to go, versus one that's got an old nest. They're like, oh, now I got to clean that out first. So that is what I recommend for nesting boxes. But yeah, so if it is wasps that usually attach at the top, try rubbing soap or wax at the top to make it less adhesive, so they can't stick their nest up there.
Thank you. That's great advice. So we have one more question. Actually, we have several. Here's one. Do you have tips for discouraging hawks?
Okay. I'm going to guess that these are sharp-shinned or Cooper's hawks. So we have, lots of hawks in Central Oregon, falcons, all sorts of stuff. But the ones that typically affect people in their backyards with their feeders are the sharp-shinned and the Cooper's hawks. They are kind of the smaller hawks. They're not the big red-tailed hawks soaring. They're smaller. And they actually specialize on eating birds. I mean, that's what they do. That is their life, is that they hunt small birds. So yes, obviously they're gonna, if they find a bird feeder, tons of birds, they're like, sweet. Usually what happens, they show up in your yard. All of a sudden, your bird feeders that have been a hubbub of activity all day just go silent. And you're just like, what is going on? And if you look, all the birds have disappeared, or they're under bushes in your different layers in your yard going to shelter. And there may be some little high-pitched peeping, but not the normal calls. So look around, and chances are there's going to be a hawk quietly sitting on your fence or up in a tree, and he's just kind of sitting there. And these hawks are kind of from a robin size to twice a robin size. They kind of vary in size from if they're male or female. And they will sit quietly and kind of wait to see, once the birds have spotted them, then they'll kind of sit quietly and say, maybe the birds will forget and come back out. So sometimes they'll come and disrupt your yard for like an hour or two. Sometimes they're going to catch a bird. And what we say is these birds are native. They catch birds. They're going to catch a bird somewhere in your neighborhood anyways. When people complain they're feeding them at their bird feeder, we're like, well, we did say it was a bird feeder. We just didn't say what kind of bird was going to be feeding from it. So they are going to catch some. Occasionally, there'll be a lazy one that is just like, this is easy. I'm never going to move on from this yard. So they might be there for a week or two. But the longer they're in your yard, the birds are going to start giving up on your bird feeder after a while. If the hawk's there every day, all the little songbirds will be like, skip this feeder. It's too dangerous. We'll move on. Eventually, the hawk's going to move on, and then your birds will come back. So it can just be, a 1 hour thing going on. It could be a couple days. But those birds, they do eat other birds, and they do pick off the weaker ones. So, just kind of think of it as the circle of life. Sometimes it's not pretty to see up close. But it's also kind of exciting to see those hawks too, because they're amazing birds and they're so good at what they do.
Okay, thanks, Jen. So you have lots of interest in this session. There's lots of questions coming in. I'm going to combine two because they are very similar. First one is, how can we prevent the damage to the siding of our house from cavity nesters? And the other one is, are there natural ways to discourage flickers from drilling your house? So kind of similar.
Yeah, this is super timely this time of year because this is when everybody, and actually we've got company, and we've got a flicker who's been drumming on our stovepipe every morning. So it's nice and loud in the morning. So we've had lots of discussions. Okay, so with the birds attacking the sides of your house, it's going to be pretty much two species. It's going to be that little pygmy nuthatch that, like I said, the baby woodpecker. I mean, he's about yay big. And then there's going to be the flickers. Most of the other woodpeckers don't attack houses much. They're very well behaved in Central Oregon, but those are our two culprits. So it's either big or little. If it's the little pygmy nuthatch, best advice, get a nest box and put it up for them. So they are the one tiny bird that can actually excavate their own home. And they love, especially if you've got like the cedar shingles, because there's all those little cracks and crevices between them. And there's a little knot that fell out. So it's kind of like it already started it for them. So they're going to peck in and try and do that. Putting up a nest box is the easiest solution because what the bird is telling you is, I need a place for a nest. I live in your yard. This is my neighborhood. I need a place to nest. I've picked the side of your house, which I know you're not happy about, but it's perfect for me. If you get a nest box that's the right size for that bird and put it up, he's gonna, especially if you put it up on your house, like a lot of people are like, where should I put the nest box? I'm like, well, depending where it is on your house, if it's around the side of your house, put it up right literally where they were pecking, because they picked that spot for a reason. We don't know why, but they love that spot. So if you put the house there, 95% of the time, they're just gonna move right into the house. Once they're in a house, they don't have to peck holes anymore because they have a hole. And then they are gonna be defending that area from any other competitors. So that's the simplest solution. If you don't want it on your house, put the nest box as close as possible to where they're pecking. And then you might need to get some of that mylar ribbon we talked about for repelling birds, because you want to scare them away from where they've already picked. And hopefully then they're like, oh, I can't, the house is scary now. It's got these mylar ribbons. Oh, hey, look, there's a nest right there. Maybe I'll just move right in there. So that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to convince them to do what you want them to do. So that's the pygmy nuthatches. And a lot of people ask, like, how big is their territory? Like, how many boxes do I need? Pygmy nuthatches, so I live in Bend, kind of have a normal house size lot. I do have two families of pygmy nuthatches, one in the front yard. There's actually a nest box right outside this window. And then I have one in the back too, who's actually kind of on my neighbors across the alley. We kind of share him. His territory must span both of our houses. So you might need more than one. If you put up a nesting box on one side of your house and the birds are living there, but all of a sudden somebody's pecking on the other side of your house, you might need another one there because their territories are smaller. The other bird that does this, the flicker, which is bigger and louder, so you hear them, and they can make, and they're looking for a hole that's about 2.5 inches in diameter. So when they make a hole, you see it. Their territory is much bigger. Their territory is almost kind of like a city block. So if you get a nesting box up for a flicker, think of yourself as doing a favor to all your neighbors. You're probably protecting all of their houses at the same time. And so the flickers, same thing. And the reason the birds, like we mentioned this before, they want to build a house in a dead tree. We've probably taken all the dead trees down, so we may have a ton of live trees in our yard, but that's not what they want. So putting up a nesting box for them, again, is a solution. The flickers this time of year, one thing to keep in mind, there are two different kinds of sounds that they're making. So they could be pecking a hole in your house, and you definitely want to like get a nesting box up or find some solution to stop them from doing damage. When they're pecking a hole, they're going to be hearing sounds like peck, 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 peck. It's going to be kind of irregular and forcible. Like think about like they're actually trying to like chip out a piece of wood. The other sound you're going to hear early in the morning, today it was 6:30, is you'll hear this really fast, what they call drumming, which is, it's like a super fast, and usually that is on stovepipes, gutters, anything loud, metal, anything hollow metal, they love, light poles. That is where that's the male doing that, and he is proclaiming his territory and trying to attract a female. So he wants to be loud because the louder he is, the sexier he sounds. The good news when they do that, they're not doing any damage. They're not making a hole. I'm like, I've even looked like up on my roof where mine is pecking on my stovepipe. It doesn't even really chip the paint. So it's not doing damage. It is kind of annoying early in the morning because it can be really loud, but it's not doing damage. So that's the good news, is that you don't have to stress out about. That usually lasts 3 to 6 weeks in the spring until the male finds a lady and is too busy raising his babies to like make noise anymore. So we usually recommend the nest box in conjunction with, if you don't want it on your house, hang those ribbons to scare them away and hopefully into a nesting box. Once they're in the nesting box, they're going to defend against any of their own same species. A flicker, like I said, about a city block. So once you get one in a box, you're golden. He's gonna be up at dawn patrolling, keeping all the other males away. No one else is going to be making holes. He doesn't need to make another hole because he has a perfectly good box. And then you're set. That's kind of a long-term solution. Better than chucking pine cones at 5 in the morning, trust me.
We had someone ask, does it matter what direction the nest box faces?
Not really. You'll often read a lot where they're like, basically, you don't want the nest box to face into the prevailing wind. You don't want the wind to go straight into the nest box hole. So it's kind of depending where you live, kind of get a feel for that. It's not as important because I've definitely seen birds use boxes in the worst orientation straight into the wind. So I think that's less important than just general location and height. Like all nest boxes need to be at least like 5 feet off the ground. Birds will nest lower. It's just really dangerous for them. I've seen a chickadee nest in a stump this far off the ground, and I'm like, it's cute, but what are you doing? Like any predator could just walk in there and eat your babies. So we say 5 feet high because that keeps the birds safe. Some birds like to be even higher. So like flickers like to be at least 10 feet. They like to be high. So a flicker's ideal place would be up under the eaves of your second story house or as high as possible on a ponderosa pine. So they want to be high, but again, look where they're pecking and take the cues from that. Like that's what he chose. So that's what he likes. So I need to kind of replicate that height, that area.
Okay, thank you. That's good.
Okay, so I went to a question because I think it's a real important one and we're running out of time. What do you recommend when you have birds striking your window?
Perfect. So birds hit your window because on the outside of if you have birds hit your window, go outside from their perspective and look at your windows. I can guarantee you're going to see the sky and the trees reflected in your window because we have all those UV coatings on the outside of our windows. It reflects. So to the birds, it just looks like I'm flying through the forest. So you need to break up that reflection on the outside of the window. There's different ways to do that. We have several different types of decals that you can stick to the outside of your window. Putting them on the inside of the window doesn't really work. Pulling your blinds doesn't always help because that doesn't break up that reflection on the outside of the window. You need to get something outside. So we have 3 or 4 different types of decals that you can put up. They work best, obviously, if you put one decal in the middle of a giant plate glass window, it may or may not help. They might just fly to the side and hit the glass there. So, more decals works better. We have one system of tiny little dots that you can apply, and they're spaced 2 inches apart. Once you get them up, you can virtually not see them. These are the same ones if you go to the High Desert Museum. They have a whole display with all those big glassed in corridor windows. So that's a really good place to go see it in real life before you decide to do it to your windows. But that's the most effective. It's virtually 100% effective. You can hang streamers, wind chimes, something outside your window, again, to kind of repel them. But again, it depends how many and how big they are. They might just kind of go around them. Certain windows will get hit more in your house than others, and that just has to do with the way the sun hits your windows, the way your yard, where birds are flying through your yard naturally. So you may find that you've got a couple windows you really need to deal with, and the rest of your windows nobody ever hits. So that's a lot of these decals are removable, so you can just kind of move them around and kind of get your perfect situation. Another thing that seems contrary is you can hang a window feeder on your window. That will actually reduce flight because again, when the birds are coming to the feeder, they're going to be slowing down, coming in. If they're sitting on the feeder on your window, even if they get scared by a predator, worst case, they kind of jump up and bounce off the window, but they're not going fast enough to hurt themselves yet. It's when they're flying full tilt and hit the window. That's when it hurts them. So that's what you're trying to stop them, make them cautious as they approach your windows.
Thank you very much.
Okay, we're just about out of time, but can you speak about the bird flu risk and how to reduce the
Waiting for
risk
that. I thought
to
that'd be the number
backyard
one
birds?
question. Yes. So bird flu. So, the news vacillates in how scary it is at different things. Overall, unless you have backyard chickens, that would be the only time we recommend taking down your feeders. Songbirds, the small birds that are coming to our backyards, rarely they don't have a lot of the bird flu going through that. And even if they do have it in their bodies, they don't have enough to be spreading it. They don't have enough of a viral load. There are some birds that have gotten it, but we're talking like of the hundreds of thousands of birds they've tested, like, a couple hundred have tested positive across all of North America. Bird flu is being spread. It's mainly carried by waterfowl. So when they say wild birds, what they're really talking about are ducks, shorebirds, geese. Those are the ones that are carrying it. And it doesn't really make them super sick. So they're just carrying it, transmitting it as they migrate north and south. So that's where it's kind of the spring and fall migrations are when all of a sudden there's outbreaks at different places. The big problem is our domestic chickens, turkeys, ducks have no resistance to it at all. So if they get sick, that's why they're, recommending that they just take care of all of them because it doesn't really seem to be curable. Some animals are more susceptible to it. So unfortunately, raptors seem to be susceptible to it. So there have been a lot of eagles that are getting it. They're probably eating dead ducks that they're finding in migration that have it. That's how they're getting it. There have been some outbreaks in cats, both domestic and wild cats. So it seems like cats are somewhat susceptible. So that's why they're definitely saying don't feed a raw food diet that's chicken or duck based right now because we don't know how it's getting to the cats. So really, but from your backyard birds, virtually no danger. We follow the Cornell Lab of Ornithology that do top research in birds. They've said there's no reason to take down your feeders unless you have backyard chickens. And that would just be to prevent any birds from coming in attracted to the spilled bird seed, maybe from your feeders that might transmit it to your chickens. If you've got backyard ducks, they've already recommended, try and keep the wild ducks from landing in, fence off ponds or drain open ponds and only have like covered ponds because you don't want the wild ducks to come in and transmit it to your domestic ones. That's the biggest risk. No risk, nothing that's happened between wild birds and people. The people getting it have all been through cattle or working in commercial chicken farms. But that being said, always clean your feeders because there are other diseases that birds get, and we just want to keep them healthy as well as keeping us healthy. So always cleaning feeders. If you do find a dead bird, definitely wash your hands just because it could have who knows what.
Thank you for that. We do have 2 more questions, and I'm hoping they'll be quick.
Sure.
So we're just a couple minutes over, and we might as well see if we can finish these. Thank you. We have talked about keeping other critters from the feeder, seeds that fall to the ground, and the feeder itself. She's had raccoons take the feeder from the tree and throw it down. Do you have a suggestion?
Oh, those raccoons. Yeah. We don't have a ton of raccoons in Central Oregon, but man, raccoons with those little hands, they can get into everything. So we do have some things. So raccoons just like to mess with stuff, as you know. And so things that you can do is if the raccoons are coming, you know, they can climb all sorts of trees and stuff, so they can probably get to your feeders. If they're just knocking them down, you can get like think of them like dog clips, you know, from like dog leashes, those kind that you need an opposable thumb. They don't have an opposable thumb, so that's the only thing saving us. So clip your feeder on so that even if they get on the feeder and shake it, it can't unhook. We have some little clamps you can add. So if you have like a curved hook that you're just hanging your feeder on, it clamps at one end and you can kind of twist it over, just so they can't lift the feeder up and dump it. To keep raccoons off a feeder, we do have some cages you can put over them, which keeps them, you know, the feeder is inside of a cage, so they can't, you know, they can try and reach in or shake it, but they can't actually grab it. And if it's on a pole, if you have a bird feeding pole, that they're just climbing up and they can't get to, like, you know, from the top or side, you can get a baffle to keep them from climbing up the pole. That also works with squirrels. The pole has to be far away enough from trees or fences that they can't just, you know, jump over from the fence and skip the baffle. So there are some different ways to do it. And the hot pepper seed has been working really well with raccoons.
Good, thank you.
You know, they have to try it once or twice to like see that it's spicy. So again, if they're dumping your feeder, try and find a way to actually kind of lock your feeder up there, even bungee cords temporarily, just to keep them from knocking it down.
Okay.
Oh, and
Grady,
one
did you
more
want
thing
to?
is the raccoons often come at night. So if they start knocking it down, take your feeders down. I mean, it's a pain to bring them down at night and put them up in the morning, but for a week or two, maybe the raccoons will move on.
Sure.
Great idea.
Okay. Last question. I saw a nesting bird pulling hair out of the welcome mat at my front door and adding it to a nest. Is it okay to leave some hair from my brush out for the bird to use as nesting material?
Yes, and that's good. So we get this. So human hair is fine as long as it's clean and you're not putting a lot of product in it. Obviously, whatever chemicals, the products, you know, the babies are going to be sitting on it. It's going to be against their little naked skin till they grow feathers. Who knows what people are putting in their hair? So make sure it's clean. And if it's longer like this, cut it into like 1 inch sections and then put it out. You don't want long hairs because it can wrap around their feet and get stuck on their toes. This is a big thing I've heard of, like with pigeons in big cities. I don't know why, but it can wrap around their toes and cut off circulation. So you don't want to put out long pieces of anything. I would say, you know, 1 to 2 inches would be as long as you want to put out. So if it's your hair, if it's short hair, perfect. If it's long hair, chop it up first just so it's not too long. Same with pet hair, because a lot of people, you know, your dogs are shedding like mad, or your cats. That hair is great to put out, with the warning if you are using a flea or tick control. You don't want to put that out because those flea and tick toxins are not tested out on birds. And again, the babies will be sitting right on it. So, you know, if you want to brush them out before you treat them for fleas and ticks, that's perfect. But yeah, once you've treated them, then don't use it.
Good advice. Thank you. I know from attending your store in the past, I've seen I don't know, like a little cage with cotton in it. So you could hang it. So that would provide nesting material.
Yep, we sell little balls with alpaca fur in it. And also we have sheep wool, just kind of natural sheep wool. So those are both good, again, without, you know, treatments on them. And cotton, if you're going to use cotton, use natural cotton, not a processed, bleached, because the natural cotton has some natural oils on it, which are actually better and make it a better insulator.
Sounds wonderful. I think that's all really good advice. And I want to move back to my final screen here. So, whoops, sorry about that. We at the Central Oregon Master Gardener Association wish to thank Jen for taking the time to speak with us today. And thank you to our guests and participants who attended our webinar today. Your feedback helps us improve our webinar, so please take a moment to complete our short survey. And thank you all for coming once more. We do appreciate it and hope that you join us for more of our webinars Saturdays for the rest of the month. Thank you, and we'll be logging off now. Thanks, Jen.
Great. Thanks so much for having me.
And goodbye.